Good afternoon, YouTube. Peace in, everybody. So I keep getting a lot of emails and messages about talking about the SHSAT ELA section. And there's reasons why I and other tutors don't do it a lot online, because it has its own complexities to kind of describe. The first and foremost kind of being like, to put a paragraph up on YouTube is hard to do for a couple of reasons. So what I'm going to try to do is bite-size off this issue, at least for a first shot at some of the stuff. First, let me start up by saying my name is Greg from GregsTutoringNYC at gmail.com. I already have a bunch of ELA-based YouTubes that are all, so far, perfectly acceptable to prepare for the SHSAT. So what I want to try to do in this YouTube is to try to kind of pinpoint a few things down and try to make sense of it all in a way, including some kind of philosophical aspects I want to bring up. The first is that, and this applies to the math part as well then, that a lot of people, so at some point I'm going to give you a topic list here. In fact, I'm going to give you kind of a few lists in a way. I'm going to give you a specific English topic list. I'm also going to break down the SHSAT. I'm going to talk about some general stuff. So let me kind of start off with that, because people are like, what should I study? How can I get better at ELA? What is the list of topics? And this applies again to the math part. And there's no finite answer to this. The Department of Education of New York City never releases that information. And all we're basically told is that it's grade 7 and grade 8. And there's some truth to that, a lot of real truth to that. And there's also kind of a fallacy to that statement from them. So what I want to talk is about it generally, and we'll get into specifics, and you'll see why this is blurry. In fact, I'm going to end up giving you guys a ton of specifics, and you'll see why it becomes blurry at some point. So what happens is, once I give somebody a bunch of lists like this, including some of my own students, they'll just start studying that. So if I tell them the ELA is probably going to have commas on it, they'll go and study commas, for weeks. And maybe I'm exaggerating that point, but if I tell them the semicolons, commas, and periods, and punctuation marks, they'll just study that to the max. And this is true again on the math side of things. Sorry for that bing, if everybody heard that. It might just ring in your ear if you have a headset on. And what happens is people stop mindlessly studying and preparing for any standardized test, but especially the SHSAT. Once they hear, for instance, that there's the Pythagorean theorem on the math part, they'll just go nuts studying the Pythagorean theorem, going after example after example after example after example. And that's not how you study, and that's not how you learn. Remember, you're going to these specialized high schools to learn and become a better educated student and so on. You're not just being a droid and a mindless thing where you absorb information. Now, a lot of people can't learn that way, first of all. And if you cram and prep that way, it's not going to go anywhere. At best, you're going to go sideways, and most people are going to crash and burn. So the idea that once you get a topic list that you just start going for it, and you mindlessly study the topic list until you drop, is silly. It's random. It's a poor strategy. For the most part, it's a waste of time. And it can be very expensive. If nothing else, it's expensive in terms of your time. But some of you go into prep centers and all these other things where you're just mindlessly, as droids, processing just as much as you can until you drop. What it means is you're going to be exhausted. You're going to be psychologically destroyed, and it's a demeaning process. And none of this should happen that way. If you're learning properly, you should be enjoying it, first of all. And you should be learning in a productive, conducive, progressive manner and way. Okay? So if you're feeling like you're dead and it's a demeaning process, and oh my God, my life depends on passing the SHSAT, and all these kind of things like that, you're doing this wrong. You're barking up the wrong tree. And that's the problem with a lot of people who ask me, what do I study? Why don't you give me the topics? Like, it's my fault. It's not my fault. Okay, and I'm getting slightly animated because I've actually had students and families complain to me like I'm the one creating the list. Especially online, there's people, I've given out the grade, especially for the grade 9. over and over and over, I get people asking me about the green line math list. And I've given it. And then they still ask, well, what's this and what's this? The problem is that it's never explained to us. It's a mystery black box. There's kids come and take a test. They do this black box process. They get to pass the cutoff or not, and they come out the other side. So the best we can do is the best we can do. Okay? But mindlessly studying all these topics like a droid is not the way to do it. First of all, and I'll say this even if it was the state test. Okay? And then there's the issue of how do you actually process and prepare yourself for a standardized test? Any of them, but especially the SHSAT. And what you want to do is try to understand the premise of the test. The premise of the SHSAT is very different than the premise of the New York State test, for instance. They do different things. The New York State test basically tests the kid's knowledge on what they learned. The SHSAT also incorporates that idea, but it adds on to it. Okay? The SHSAT, the premise of the SHSAT is context. Okay? It wants to know how a kid deals with novel situations. It wants to know how a kid deals with, even if they know something, what happens when it's pieced together into a bigger picture. Okay? Right? If I explain what commas are in the case of ELA and what periods are, it wants to know that they can use a comma and a period in the same sentence, both correctly and incorrectly, to understand the difference. The same goes for the math. Okay? You need to know how to do arithmetic and multiplication separately and together. And that's what word problems are about, where they combine this different stuff. And the same kind of issues happen in the ELA section. And this is what some people are missing. You can't just prepare for commas. You need to prepare for grammar and ELA and reading comprehension and all the different parts at every level. And that doesn't mean to do more mindless studying and attacking of these problems. It means to take it a piece at a time and figure it out by context, because that's a lot about what the SHSAT is about. It's about being creative. It's about thinking. It's a cognitive process. That's what the SHSAT's supposed to be about, because that's what a lot of the specialized high schools is about. That's what makes a specialized high school special. It's not run-of-the-mill. If you were to create a list of what makes a specialized high school special, these are the kind of things you're talking about. Thinking outside the box, being with like peers, so on and so on and so on. And this is the mentality you want to take when you're studying and preparing for a standardized test, including and especially the SHSAT. The SHSAT's very unique in a number of ways. And if you do that, you'll have a fun time, you'll enjoy it, you'll actually learn, and instead of being psychologically devastated and things like that, you're going to improve as you go through the process. Organize your progression. Right now there's like 9 weeks left. Figure out from where you're going, or if you started later or if you started earlier. No matter how you do it, logically split up so that you're taking a logical, healthy approach to all this. And that's the way to improve and succeed. And again, you have to understand what the SHSAT is and what the SHSAT isn't. Because studying for commas is great. I'm not saying don't study for commas on all the other topics. What I'm saying is understand the test you're taking and work with it from that perspective and way. Okay? All right. Let me say a few other things. So I created the topic list that I'm going to show you. This is not from the Department of Education. This is something I came up with after years and years of research and curating what was on the test and things like that. And it's not a complete list. And what I'm going to give you is not guaranteed to be on any given year's test. So I'm going to show you about 100 topics, and there might be 200 topics. So some of those extra 100 topics may almost never appear on the test. And of the 100 I'm going to show you, they may only give 50. So you can't say, oh my God, you didn't tell me about an M-dash, right? My topic list tells about, colons and periods and dashes and stuff like that. Well, there might be a special dash that I didn't mention. It's not up to me to tell you guys that. It's just the general issues of what your child learned in grade 7 and grade 8, and hopefully they know more than that, and the context of originality and creativity with it, so that if there's a certain context in a given sentence or something like that, that they can figure out where a dash might be, even if they never knew it was supposed to be there. That kind of thing. Because once you understand what the feature is about, or the syntax, or the semantics of something grammatical or something involving English or reading and stuff like that, then you should be able to use it in a multitude of contexts, including contexts you've never seen before. So that's the essence. That's what part of the SHSAT is about. So yes, it's testing your raw, fundamental, basic knowledge, but it's also testing your usage of it and things like that. So again, this is my list. The Department of Education is not trying to dupe you by not giving you the list. They've never given the list. They never will. Okay? And that's where you need to work from. So from that context, there shouldn't be one. Because in some ways, you should only study so much for the SHSAT. If you're studying for every last ounce out of it, again, you're making a fatal mistake. I can't keep emphasizing as much how much a mistake that would be. All right? And you're misunderstanding the whole context of what the SHSAT's about. And even the specialized high schools. All right? With that in mind, I'm often asked, how do I get better at ELA? Okay? Well, there's my standard answer, which is read and write. The more you read and the more you write, the more better you're going to get at it. Then your response to me might be, well, you just told us not to mindlessly study. And just telling us reading and writing is kind of a mindless response. And you'd be exactly right. It is. So I'm going to give you more context to some of that. But of course, the fundamental aspects to English language arts, ELA, is reading and writing. Okay, and then it's split from there. We split down a whole bunch of hierarchies involving a whole bunch of stuff. The basic premise to do a lot of reading is that you're observing how other writers write. Okay, and the basic premise for saying to write is that you're getting experience writing. Okay, you will be doing it in a vacuum, and doing any of this in a vacuum is bad, which means you need to have an expert involved with you. Okay, doing it without that is super, super tough and close to impossible. So you need a teacher working with you. You need a tutor working with you. And it doesn't have to be every day and every week, but certainly check in every so often, at the least with somebody who is an expert, that knows what the test is asking for, that knows what ELA is about, that knows the subtopics that a grade 7 and grade 8 student should know, especially an accelerated or an advanced one. Okay? So there's a whole bunch of issues like that. So what we want to do is, once we start reading and writing a lot, we're going to start focusing. So it's a less random kind of arbitrary process, where you might realize, oh, I have a problem with reading scientific books, but I don't have a problem reading a novel. Or I have a problem writing. I don't have a problem writing for like the New York State test and the short responses, but I have a problem writing a creative piece about something. Okay, and by the way, the SHSAT does not ask you to write. Other tests do. But the more you write as well, and the more you write correctly, and the more you write with a strategy, and the more you write with purpose, right? With purpose is important for all this. The more you do all that, the better off you're going to be. And again, you want to be having somebody look at this, even if it's just the layperson. Have them read it over. Okay, have them ask questions about what you just read. And there's levels of questions here, and that's where the problem is, that we really want to touch home here. Okay, so we can kind of go backwards now. Again, how do I get better at ELA? Well, first thing you should do, and this is also a general strategy, and I've covered this on some other YouTubes a number of times, is figure out your strengths, right? And then what you want to do is, and a lot of people figure out the strengths, and then they just move on to figuring out the weaknesses. No way. No way. Figure out your strengths and strengthen your strengths. First of all, this is a test. So a point is a point no matter where you get the point from. If you get a point from a test-taking skill, take it. If you get the point from the math section, take it. If you get a point from the ELA, take it. If you get a point from revising editing, take it. Okay, that's number one. Number two is, the more you learn, and the more you learn properly, and the more you know, the better off you're going to do on a test like this. Okay? So you want to strengthen your strengths. And even from a pacing strategy, that makes sense. Because then some of the topics might be so hard for you, or so foreign to you, or whatever the case may be, it might be worth not emphasizing your time and money and energy on some of those topics, but making your strengths stronger and leaving your weaknesses the way they are. That said, you want to figure out your weaknesses as well, and you also want to strengthen your weaknesses. Because even though there might be a few topics, like some super hard math topic, or in the case of ELA, you just can't get what a clause is or something like that, well then work on the other parts, because you have to balance your time back and forth to what makes sense, what is best, and things like that. So at the end of the day, I'm telling you to work on both your strengths and the weaknesses. Work on them together. And work on gotchas that pop up. Okay? And also work on new issues that you're starting to find out about. Okay, some of you are going to have things on the SHSAT, because it's the grade 8 SHSAT, that you were never taught yet because you're going to take it in October. You're going to take it 2 months into grade 8. And some of your teachers either didn't teach it last year or will not be teaching it. And some of the things you're actually going to learn about the week before the SHSAT. Not too many topics, because that's the purpose of going to grade 8 is not to take the SHSAT, it's to learn grade 8 material. Okay? And there's also a point with all this, and it gets back to the mindlessness of some of this and so on, is know when to cut your losses. Okay? You don't have infinite amounts of time, you don't have infinite amount of money, you don't have infinite amount of energy, and this, at this point, there's 71 days, I think, at this point, until this is at. So you got to figure out how to balance that back and forth. So cut your losses, okay? And assess where you are. So assessment is super duper important. And assessment doesn't mean take a test. Oh, good, I got 50. Take it again. Oh, good, I got 60. Oh, take it again. Oh, good, I got 70. You're supposed to be taking these practice tests or assessments, or however you do it, and learning from the assessment itself. Because the assessment itself can tell you where some of your strengths and weaknesses are. Okay? But that can be deceptive as well sometimes. So you have to balance things out and have them make sense. So you do want to learn from your mistakes and so on. For argument's sake, somebody may not know punctuation properly and fail a whole bunch of reading comprehension questions over that. And it looks like they're failing main idea or something where the error they had is really on another topic. So you need to be careful when you're doing the assessments, but do the assessments. But if you're taking 20, 30, 40, 50 practice tests of some sort, you've made a gross error and you're making a fatal mistake. Okay, even if you improve between them. Because between your assessments, you're supposed to be learning the topics you didn't learn and things like that. Okay? So let's look at what the DOE is telling us about the SHSAT so that you understand how the ELA part is broken down. So there's revising and editing, okay? And there's also reading comprehension. So revising and editing, in some cases, will happen at a sentence time. Sentence at time. In other cases, will happen at paragraph time. So they may give you a sentence, okay, and ask you, is there an error in there? Okay, if there is, then you circle A, B, C, or D. Okay? And it could be on any kind of grammatical topic or even non-grammatical topics, just relating, usually just to a sentence. The paragraph form might give you a paragraph, and there might be a sentence that doesn't belong. So that's also revising and editing, right? Or there might be a sentence in the wrong place, so it becomes a sequencing error or something like that. Or there's just something that doesn't flow. Or inside of there, there's misuses of like active voice versus passive voice. Or the beginning might start in the current tense, and it might end up in the past tense. That would be an error. That's really not a grammatical thing strictly, like a missing period, or at least syntactically. But semantically, which is the meaning, it's not going to have any sense. Okay? So there's normally about 9 to 11 questions of that is what they're doing, at least for 2019. Okay? So figure about 5 questions each of these is basically what you want. The reading comprehension, this is similar to in style to the normal state test. So there'll be passages and questions. So there's normally about 5 to 6 passages with about 5 to 6 questions each. Okay? So you're going to get about 40, 45 questions or so on, however that breaks down. Sometimes one passage might have 7 questions, another might have 5. There will be poetry. There will be all genres, basically. Okay? Middle schools are starting to teach more genres as well. So your child should have experience with the different genres. But that might be something you want to practice as well. Don't just focus on short story kind of passages that they may have gotten, say, in grade 3 and grade 4 on the grade 3 and 4 state tests. And remember, too, that the SHSAT questions are going to be harder. But in any event, you want to read a plethora and a myriad and a variety of different kinds of literature, including poetry. There will be definitely poetry on the SHSAT. And again, I can't guarantee you this. I'm not writing the SHSAT, but I'm pretty sure there will be one. And there may even be 2 poetry passages. So I'm emphasizing poetry because this is somewhere a lot of people don't like poetry or say they don't. And this is one of the stumbling stopgaps involved in taking a lot of these kind of tests. So that's kind of the overview of what the DOE is providing us. And I believe this is covered in the SHSAT handbook in enough detail. Again, enough detail just to more or less say what I just said. So let me present the topic list. Let me bring that up. I have it on a file. So give me 1 second to get that loaded. So in the meantime, I'm Greg from GregsTutoringNYC at gmail.com. Please email me your questions. I tutor kids in a whole plethora of things, including the SHSAT, also the Hunter test. And by the way, a lot of topics I'm going to show you right now are kind of generic. And I don't have the time to explain each one right now. So as we cover additional ELA YouTubes, again, if you look at my past ones, you'll see some of these topics, but again, in the future ones. All right, so give me 1 second here. I'm going to load the topic list. Where did it go? Why isn't that showing up? Oh, here we go. All right, so let's bring that up in front. Bloop. Okay, there we go. Let's move me over. And this is, as far as I know, the most encompassing ELA list ever produced for the SHSAT, at least to my experience. So what it basically covers is kind of all English. So that's kind of the problem here, that since it's kind of covering all English, now that you have the topic list, it's a hard nut to crack. Because again, I gave the example before with dashes. There may or may not be dashes on the SHSAT. Now, I can tell you most likely there won't be dashes. There won't be a question on a dash. But I don't want to tell you that. I can't guarantee you that. I don't know what they're going to ask you. And I can give you, a lot of the often topics. There's going to be a lot of questions about transitions, things involving prepositional phrases, incomplete sentences, run-on sentences. There's definitely be comments. And when I say definitely, again, I'm just going from past history. A lot of stuff about commas. I left out information about like titles of things, because whether the title should be quoted or things like that. Anyway, and it just runs the full gamut of everything here. You're going to have uses of pronouns, singular versus plural, mixed tenses, active voice versus passive voice. There might be a homophone, which is words like there THEIR versus THERE versus THEY apostrophe R. Again, there might be things about contractions and apostrophes. Okay, apostrophes most likely will come up. Again, quotations, how does that happen? Okay, things like that. It's a very tricky kind of thing. And this is basically, I'm starting with a lot of the grammar stuff here. Like when you're revising and editing something, is something being repeatedly said when it couldn't or it shouldn't have? Things like that. So these become. And then the specific stuff like who versus whom, they versus them, when to use a pronoun properly, subject-verb agreement. Are we matching tenses right? Are we matching singular versus plural? Sorry about flashing the screen here. This spelling sometimes might come up. Punctuation will definitely come up. So that doesn't really focus on vocabulary and spelling per se. They become kind of indirect side topics. So they may ask you something, and it's more about the contextual use of it again. That was what I was framing earlier. But there's also passive voice, active voice, comparative versus superlative. Sometimes there's a passage about reading something, basically like how to use a library or something like that. I may have questions about that. Sometimes there's even a question about an illustration, believe it or not. It might be interpreting a chart, which, by the way, all the ELA ties into all the math, because if you can't read a word problem, then you got a problem, right? Sometimes it's about the main idea. When we move more into reading comprehension, main idea, and it's supporting the main idea. Not just the main idea, but what supports it. A lot of kids have a problem distinguishing a main idea versus something that supports it. And a lot of kids have a problem distinguishing between a main idea and a sub-main idea. It can become very confusing. There's also the author's purpose and so on. Why did they write the piece in the first place? That's not necessarily the same as the main idea. The same for a theme or a moral. They are all connected to main idea and so on, but they may not be directly the main idea. Okay? Again, poetry is going to be on it. There's things about how things are sequenced and organized, both in the revising and the editing part. But if you don't understand that, even when you get to the reading comprehension part, you need to also understand that. And for anybody taking any tests involving writing, because again, this list is not just strictly about the SHSAT, even though that's why I produced it. You want to have your organization of flow of your piece working well. So you need to do comprehension versus deep comprehension. Passage summary, you could read a passage and say, what's the passage about? And a lot of kids can repeat it back to you. But what does it mean at a more deeper level? Does it use figurative stuff? At the end here I have, what are the idioms and cliches and metaphors and similes that it uses at the end? Things like that. And if you have a main idea, how is it supported? In perspective of an argument, your child should know about persuasion and things like that. That's what this section here I'm talking about is about. All right? And how to create a conclusion. Does your child know what an inference is? The whole shebang here. So if some of these might be foreign to you, like a homophone, I described that was before, but Google is your friend here. Okay? And your child should know what a lot of these is, especially when you go look them up. You're like, oh, okay, I know what passive and active voice is. So just be clear that although some other tests do this, the SHSAT will never say, like, give me a homophone. Okay, it won't do that. Or it won't say, like, which has invalid subject-verb agreement. Okay, so the SHSAT, even on the math part, usually tends to stay away from testing terminology, or even English or the math terminology. Again, I can't guarantee you that it's going to do that. But and if it says something like which has the wrong subject-verb agreement, you have to figure it out based on the 4 choices they give you, what that could even possibly mean. Because some kids know what a verb is, but probably a lot of kids don't know what a subject is. In fact, a lot of kids can't explain a lot of things like prepositional phrase, a predicate, what a fanboy is, what a transition is. There's different things like concise language, precise language, redundancy. A few could probably explain what a tense is. But again, it doesn't matter if you can go by the dictionary definition of these. What's more important for the SHSAT is to know what they do and mean. Okay? So first of all, you should know what they are by name. But the SHSAT's testing your creativity on these things again. And again, your usage of them in a context. All right? So that's pretty much the list. And again, remember not to now go take this list and Google it and print out all these worksheets and all this other stuff. That's not what the SHSAT's about. So what you want to do is find the things that you don't know about and the usages and go for it. For instance, some schools may have never covered passive and active voice. So that might be something you need to work on. Okay? Some schools may have never covered this, certainly by name. By the way, this deals with like better, best, most best, betterest, and some of those are invalid uses. But it's, which is most likely instead of just likely, things like that. So there's all these different aspects of English that come into play, and they have different meanings. A lot of us like to use the word like. That's like really good. Or some other context where it's being ambiguous, as well as using phrases. There could be a phrase, comma, and then something else. And normally the thing right after the comma is what the phrase applies to. So that's a common error that happens often in writing, but sometimes your child's going to be asked to read that and make sense of it. And the same with pronouns. You don't want to say, Jack and Joe went up the hill, and then say he gave him the pail. Well, who's he and who's him, right? So you have to figure out all that kind of stuff like that as well. So some of this is just reviewing. Like most of you should be able to get most of the uses of apostrophes and contractions. And a contraction is something like can't instead of cannot. All right, where you're going to put an apostrophe in between the two words that you shortened. So a lot of you probably know that. Possession, like it's, and that also deals with apostrophes. Because it could be Greg's computer, so that would be apostrophe S. There's certain ways to remember that and so on. Learn what the different words are. Transitions and fanboys, like however, but, and, so, things like that. For, and, things like that. So there's a ton of this. My purpose of this thing is not to describe each one of them. It's just to present it. That's what the list is. So I hope this is helpful for people. And I just want to say again that you can't do this in a vacuum. You have to do this in the context of what the test is about. Okay? And just go for it there and figure out what's going to be happening or not on things like that. So, do this intelligently. Again, figure out where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. Get a feedback loop. Involve somebody knowledgeable in this, a teacher, a tutor, things like that, where you can get, even if it's just erratic input from them, but certainly you want consistent input so that you know where your progress is going and you know where your goals are. And what you can do is start whittling those things down to get there so that you're doing something in an intelligent fashion. All right, so that's the ELA list. I'm probably going to start going through some of these topics with you guys. It's harder to produce, again, because sometimes I have to present the passage, and I may not always have the rights to these passages. So please like the video, please subscribe, and have a great day. Peace out, people.